The sound of silence in the main factory hall was almost painful. Machines that usually filled the air with loud humming now sat still, their lights blinking red like dying stars. The smell of hot metal and oil hung in the air. Workers stood, in small groups, whispering, their faces pale, at the far end of the hall. The company's most important machine, a massive silver giant worth millions, had stopped working without warning. It was the heart of the company's production line. Without it, everything else was useless. The CEO, Mr. Dalton, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. His voice echoed in the room. How long will it take to fix this? A nervous engineer stepped forward. We don't know yet, sir. We've tried rebooting, recalibrating, even replacing the fuses. Nothing works. Mr. Dalton's voice grew sharper. Every hour this machine is down, we lose millions. Do you understand? We have a deal worth $500 million on the line. The engineers nodded, but didn't move faster, because they didn't know what else to do. They had already called in 2 external experts, but both had left shaking their heads. And in the corner of the room, almost invisible, Maria quietly swept the floor. She was wearing her usual faded blue janitor uniform, her hair tied back neatly. She kept her head down, her broom moving slowly, but her ears caught every word. Maria had worked here for 5 years. Every night, she cleaned these halls, mopped around these machines, and listened to engineers talk in their complicated language. Most of them didn't even notice her. To them, she was part of the background, like a chair or a wall. But tonight, she couldn't ignore what she was hearing. Her eyes kept drifting toward the big machine. She had cleaned around it hundreds of times. She knew the sound it made, the little hum it gave off even when it wasn't running. And she could tell something was different. Mr. Dalton slammed his fist against a nearby table. If we don't fix this by morning, we lose everything. The room went quiet again, except for the faint sound of Maria's broom. She hesitated. Her heart was beating fast. She thought about staying silent. After all, she was just a janitor. But she also thought about her son sleeping at home. She thought about the rent that was due, the unpaid bills, and the way she had once dreamed of being an engineer before life forced her to quit. School, she took a deep breath. Maria walked toward the group of engineers. "Excuse me," she said softly. A young engineer turned, looking confused. Yes. "I think I might know what's wrong with the machine," Maria said, her voice calm but unsure. The engineer blinked at her, then gave a small, almost pitying smile. "Ma'am, this is complicated. You wouldn't understand," Maria felt. A stab of embarrassment, but she didn't back away. "I've been around this machine for years. I know its sound. I know its rhythm. Something's blocking one of the smaller valves inside." Just before she could finish, another man interrupted with a laugh. "A janitor telling us how to fix a multi-million-dollar system. That's a new one." Some of the others chuckled. One even shook his head and turned away. Maria's face grew hot. She wanted to retreat, but then she noticed something. Mr. Dalton was watching her. His sharp eyes didn't have the same mocking look as the others. He was studying her. Maria quickly looked away, returning to her corner. She gripped her broom tightly, her mind racing. She could hear the engineers fumbling with tools again, repeating the same failed steps. And then, just faintly, she saw the CEO step toward her. He stopped a few feet away and spoke in a low voice, so no one else could hear. "What exactly did you just say about the valve?" Maria froze. She hadn't expected him to actually ask. She swallowed hard. "I said there's a small valve near the cooling unit. It's not visible unless you get down low and open the side panel. If it's stuck, the system won't start no matter what you do." Mr. Dalton studied her face for a moment longer, as if trying to read her mind. Then, without another word, he turned back to the engineers. "Clear the area," he ordered. "I want her to show me." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The engineers looked shocked. One of them even said, "Sir, this is an order." Mr. Dalton cut in sharply. Maria's heart pounded. This was it. The moment she either proved herself or lost her job forever. Forever, Maria stood frozen for a second, her broom still in her hands. The room had gone strangely quiet after Mr. Dalton's order. The engineers reluctantly stepped back, some crossing their arms, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Maria's heart thudded against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't part of their team. She was just the person who cleaned their mess after hours. But now, all eyes were on her, some filled with curiosity, others with a sharp edge of doubt. Mr. Dalton gestured toward the machine. "Go ahead." Maria carefully set her broom against the wall and walked forward. She felt the weight of every stare, like invisible hands pressing on her shoulders. Her palms were sweaty and her mind was racing, not because she didn't know what to do, but because this was the first time in years anyone had asked for her help in something important. She knelt beside the massive machine, the cold metal surface reflecting the factory's harsh white lights. The scent of burnt wiring lingered in the air. With a steady hand, she unlatched the side panel. The engineers muttered behind her, "She's going to break it. This is a waste of time. She probably doesn't even know what that part is." Maria ignored them. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the inside of the machine. It was exactly as she remembered from the countless times she'd wiped it down during her shifts. She could almost hear its normal, healthy hum in her mind. But tonight, that sound was missing. Her fingers found the small cooling valve near the base, tucked away where most people wouldn't look unless they knew it existed. She leaned closer, noticing a thin layer of dust and a tiny piece of metal lodged inside. She remembered the first time she had learned about valves like this. It wasn't from a classroom. It was from her father, a mechanic who used to fix old farming machines in their backyard when she was a child. He'd always tell her, "Machines are like people. You have to listen to them." Maria's hands moved carefully, almost gently. She pulled a small screwdriver from her pocket, a tool she always kept with her for fixing cleaning carts, and used it to nudge the piece of metal free. The sound of it falling onto the factory floor was small, but in the silence, it felt like a gunshot. She stepped back. "Try it now," she said quietly. The engineers hesitated. One of them gave a dramatic shrug before pressing the restart button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then WHIRRRRR, the machine came alive with a deep, steady hum. Lights flashed green. The belts began to move. The entire factory seemed to breathe again. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. One of the engineers even whispered, It's working." Mr. Dalton's expression didn't change much, but Maria caught the faint lift of his eyebrow. He turned toward her. "You knew exactly where to look," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Maria gave a small shrug. "I've been listening to this machine for years. I know when it's unhappy." Few of the engineers laughed bitterly, still embarrassed. But others looked at her differently now, their earlier arrogance replaced with cautious respect. One of them, a young man with tired eyes, stepped forward. How did you even know about that valve?" Maria glanced down at her hands, not wanting to tell her whole life story right there. "I used to study engineering," she said simply, "but life had other plans." Before anyone could say more, Mr. Dalton clapped his hands once. "All right, everyone, back to work. We have a deadline to meet." His voice was sharp, but Maria noticed the faintest trace of a smile before he turned away. She thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, long after most of the staff had gone home, Maria was back to her usual duties, mopping floors, wiping glass doors, emptying trash bins. The factory was alive again, the steady hum of the machines echoing in the background. As she worked, she felt a strange energy in the air. Workers who normally ignored her gave her nods of acknowledgement. One even said, "Good job," earlier, before hurrying off. When she reached the CEO's office to clean, she found the door slightly open. Mr. Dalton was inside, speaking on the phone. His tone was serious, but calmer than before. "Yes, the contract is safe. We're back in production." "No, it wasn't the engineers who fixed it. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Maria froze in the hallway, realizing he was talking about her. She quickly moved away before he noticed her standing there. On her way out, she checked her phone. There was a missed call from her son's school and a text from her neighbor saying her boy was asleep on the couch. She smiled softly. Maria didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the small moment tonight would change anything about her job or her life, but for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. What she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that tonight was only the beginning, because Mr. Dalton had already made a decision about her future, and it would stun everyone. The next morning, the factory floor was buzzing. Workers moved quickly, machines roared back to life, and the tension from last night seemed to have vanished. But Maria felt something strange, a kind of invisible spotlight following her everywhere. She went as she pushed her cleaning cart past the break room. She could feel eyes on her. Conversations seemed to pause when she walked by. Some people smiled politely, others avoided her gaze, and a few still wore that same doubtful smirk, like they couldn't believe what had happened. Maria didn't mind. She just wanted to get through her shift, but halfway through the morning, a tall man in a black suit appeared beside her cart. His voice was calm, but carried weight. "Mr. Dalton wants to see you." Now, Maria blinked. "Me? Why?" The man didn't answer. He just gestured toward the elevator. Her hands gripped the cart handle for a moment. She wasn't sure if this was good news or bad news, but she knew one thing. When the CEO of a billion-dollar company calls you, you don't say no. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it really was. When the doors opened, Maria stepped out into a hallway she had only ever seen while mopping floors late at night. The carpet was thick, the lights were soft, and expensive paintings lined the walls. At the end of the hallway, two large glass doors stood open. Inside, Mr. Dalton was sitting at his massive oak desk, reading a file. He looked up when she entered. "Maria, sit down." She hesitated, then sat in the chair across from him. There was a long pause. Mr. Dalton leaned back, studying her the same way he had last night before giving her the chance to fix the machine. "I've been running this company for 20 years, he said finally. "And in that time, I've learned that talent can come from anywhere. But it's rare to see someone notice something that an entire team of engineers missed." Maria stayed quiet, unsure what to say. He continued, "You saved us $500 million last night." "That's not something I forget." Maria shook her head. "I just noticed something. Anyone could have done it." "Maybe," Mr. Dalton said, leaning forward. "But no one did. Except you." His words made her chest tighten. No one had spoken to her like this in years. Then his voice shifted, becoming sharper. "Maria, I'm going to make you an offer. But it comes with risk. If you fail, you could lose everything." Her breath caught. "What kind of offer?" "I want you to join a project my best engineers are working on. It's top secret. If we succeed, it will change this company forever. If we fail, it could cost millions." Maria stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Me? On an engineering project? I'm a janitor." "You were a janitor," Mr. Dalton said firmly. "But I think you're more than that. You studied engineering before, didn't you?" Maria's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "I had my assistant look into your background this morning," he said with a faint smile. Dropped out in your second year. It's top of your class before that. Maria felt a mix of pride and discomfort. I had to take care of my son. School wasn't possible anymore. And yet, he said, you've been working around these machines for years, listening, learning, watching. You've built an expertise no classroom could give you. Maria looked down at her hands. And if I say no, then you go back to cleaning floors. Mr. Dalton said plainly, you'll still have your job. But you'll also know you turned down a chance to prove yourself. And believe me, opportunities like this don't come often. The words sat heavy in the air. Maria thought about her son, how she'd promised him a better life one day. She thought about the rent, the bills, and the quiet dreams she had buried years ago. Finally, she looked up. What exactly would I have to do? Mr. Dalton smiled faintly, as if he had been waiting for that question. You'll start by shadowing the lead engineer. You'll learn the details of the project, give your input, and if you see something no one else sees, you speak up. No matter who's in the room. Maria swallowed hard. And if I make a mistake? His voice was calm but firm. Then we all pay for it, but something tells me you won't. She sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll do it. Mr. Dalton leaned back with a satisfied expression. Good, you start tomorrow. And Maria. Yes, don't prove me wrong. As she left the office, her mind was spinning. She had just agreed to step into a world completely different from the one she knew. A world where people would doubt her even more than they did last night. But deep inside, a spark had been lit. The same spark she felt as a young student, dreaming of building machines that could change lives. What Maria didn't know was that this project would not only test her skills, it would test her courage, and the risk she had just taken would soon put her in the middle of a storm that could either destroy her or make her a legend. Maria arrived at the engineering department the next morning with her cleaning uniform, neatly folded in a bag. She wore simple clothes, a plain white blouse and dark trousers. But walking through those glass doors felt like stepping into a different world. The room was bright with rows of long desks, glowing computer screens, and walls covered with complex diagrams. People were speaking in quick, technical sentences, their eyes darting between blueprints and code. A tall man with a thin mustache looked up from his screen and frowned. Can I help you? Maria hesitated. I'm here for the new project. Mr. Dalton assigned me. That sentence was enough to stop half the room. Heads turned. Whispering started immediately. Isn't she the janitor? You're joking. This is a serious project, not a charity. Maria's cheeks warmed, but she stood her ground. A woman in a gray suit stepped forward. I'm Lorna, lead engineer here. If Dalton sent you, fine, but stay out of the way. All right, we have work to do. She followed them into a meeting room where a huge blueprint was spread across the table. It showed a massive new production machine, far more advanced than the one she had fixed. Lorna tapped the paper. This is the prototype. It's supposed to triple our production speed, but right now, it won't even start. An engineer in the back added, We've been stuck for weeks. Every attempt triggers an overload warning. Maria studied the blueprint quietly, her eyes scanning the lines, the labels, the flow of parts. She didn't interrupt. She listened. She watched. For the next hour, the team ran tests and argued about solutions. Some wanted to replace entire sections of wiring. Others suggested rewriting the software. Finally, Lorna sighed. All right, break time. Let's clear our heads. Everyone began leaving the room except Maria. She walked over to the blueprint again. Something had been bothering her since she first saw it. The design was perfect on paper, except for one small thing. A cooling line was routed in such a way that it would trap heat in the wrong place. She remembered her father's voice again. Machines are like people. If you make it hard for them to breathe, they'll collapse. Maria bent over the table, tracing the path of the cooling line with her finger. Her pulse quickened. If she was right, they were chasing the wrong problem entirely. Just then, Lorna returned with a coffee in hand. She stopped when she saw Maria leaning over the plans. "What are you doing?" she asked, sharply. Maria straightened. "I think I know why the prototype won't start." Lorna blinked. "You've been here for 2 hours. We've been here for 2 months." Maria pointed to the cooling line on the blueprint. "Right here, the heat is getting trapped. The sensors read it as an overload before the machine even finishes starting." Lorna frowned and leaned in. The rest of the team had started gathering at the doorway. Curious, that would explain the instant warning. One of them muttered. Lorna crossed her arms. "All right, let's humor her. What's your fix?" Maria took a pencil and lightly sketched an alternate route for the cooling line. Just a small adjustment. It's nothing expensive or complicated. "Reroute it this way. Give the heat somewhere to go before it reaches the sensor." The room went quiet. Finally, Lorna looked at the others. "Test it." The team moved quickly. They pulled up the software, made the adjustments, and rerouted the cooling system as Maria had shown. Everyone gathered around the massive prototype. The tension was so thick, it felt like the air had weight. Lorna gave the signal. "Start it up." A low hum began. The screens lit up. The machine's inner parts started moving. And then, nothing went wrong. No warning lights. No shutdown. The hum grew into a steady roar as the prototype fully powered on for the first time. Belts rolled, pistons pumped, and lights blinked green. The engineers stared in shock. One of them whispered, "She fixed it." In seconds. Maria stepped back, her face calm but her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Lorna turned toward her, still looking stunned. "You just saved us weeks of work." Maria gave a small shrug. "Sometimes the problem isn't where you're looking." News spread quickly. By the afternoon, people in other departments were talking about the janitor who solved the engineer's nightmare. Some were impressed, others were annoyed, but no one could deny the results. When Maria left the building that evening, she found Mr. Dalton waiting by the main doors. "You made quite an impression today," he said. "I just noticed something," she replied. He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you're here. Keep doing that." That night, Maria walked home with a strange mix of exhaustion and energy. She could already see her son's proud smile in her mind, but she also knew this was only the start. Every problem she solved would make more people respect her, and more people resent her. And soon, the biggest challenge of her life would arrive, one no blueprint could prepare her for. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find her name on everyone's lips. In the break room, 2 engineers were whispering, "She fixed it." In under a minute? Yeah, but how? You think she just guessed. At the elevators, she caught a fragment of another conversation. "Dalton's just trying to make some hero story. No way she's that smart." Maria kept her head down, but she felt the weight of every word. The respect she had earned was tangled with suspicion. Some people were genuinely impressed, but others seemed almost angry that she had succeeded. When she reached the engineering floor, Lorna greeted her with a curt nod. "We have another meeting in 10 minutes. Be ready." Maria wasn't sure if that was kindness or an order in the meeting room. The prototype success from yesterday was the main topic. Charts showed improved efficiency, and even the company's investors were starting to hear the news. But then, halfway through, a man in a sharp blue suit, an executive she didn't recognize, leaned forward. His voice was smooth but carried an edge. "So, Maria," he said, "tell us, what exactly qualifies you to be in this room?" The question hung in the air. Maria hesitated. I used to study engineering. I never finished my degree, but... So you have no official qualification, he interrupted. And yet you're here, making changes to a project worth millions. Lorna shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Dalton wasn't in the room to intervene this time. Maria sat up straighter. No, I don't have a degree. But I have years of hands-on experience, and I pay attention. Sometimes that's what matters most. The man gave a thin smile. We'll see if it's enough when things get harder. The rest of the meeting moved on, but the tension didn't fade. Maria could feel the line being drawn, those who wanted her here and those who wanted her gone. When the meeting ended, Lorna caught up to her in the hallway. Don't let Harris get under your skin. He's protective of his projects. Maria smiled faintly. Protective or threatened? Lorna didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Later that day, Maria was called to Mr. Dalton's office again. She walked in to find him on the phone, speaking in a low, serious tone. Yes, I know who she is. That's exactly why I chose her. He ended the call and looked up. Close the door, Maria. She did. Dalton leaned back in his chair. I'm going to be honest with you. People are asking questions. They want to know why I've put you on this project. They're digging into your past. Maria's heart skipped. My past. Yes. They know you dropped out of college. They know you've been a janitor for years. They even know about your son. She swallowed hard. Why does that matter? Dalton's eyes narrowed. Because some people think a person without a perfect record can't be trusted with something this big. They'll use anything to discredit you. Maria sat in silence for a moment, her hands clenched in her lap. And what about you? Do you still trust me? He didn't hesitate. More than I trust half the people in this building. Her chest loosened slightly. That evening, as she was leaving, she saw Harris, the same executive from the meeting, talking with another man near the lobby. They stopped when they saw her, their conversation abruptly cut short. Big day tomorrow, Ariz said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We'll see if you can keep that streak going. Aria didn't reply. She just walked past them, but in her mind, she knew one thing. They were waiting for her to fail at home. Her son was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up and grinned. Hey Mom, how was work? Maria smiled, pushing the day's worries aside. Busy but good. He frowned slightly. You've been working a lot lately. Is everything okay? She nodded. Better than okay. I think things might be changing for us. She didn't tell him about the people doubting her. She didn't tell him about the whispers in the hallways. She just wanted him to see her as strong, someone who never backed down. But as she lay in bed that night, her mind wouldn't stop racing. The questions from the meeting echoed in her head. The looks from certain people burned in her memory. And she knew tomorrow they would test her again. This time, it wouldn't just be about fixing a machine. It would be about proving she belonged here, and all the morning air in the office felt heavier than usual. Maria stepped out of the elevator and instantly noticed it. The unusual silence on the engineering floor. People weren't chatting, and every pair of eyes seemed sharper, more focused. Lorna met her at the door. We have a problem, she said quietly. Maria's stomach tightened. What kind of problem? The prototype failed during a test. Last night, Lorna explained, it's completely shut down halfway through. Harris is already telling people it's because of your cooling line adjustment. Maria froze. That's not possible. The reroute worked perfectly yesterday. Lorna shrugged. Possible or not, Harris is using it. There's an emergency meeting in 10 minutes, and Dalton will be there. In the meeting room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The prototype's failure was projected on the big screen, numbers flashing red, graphs dipping sharply. Harris stood at the head of the table looking smug. Ladies and gentlemen, we gave this project over to new hands, unqualified hands. And look what happened. He gestured toward the data like a lawyer presenting evidence. Our system was tampered with. Adjustments were made without full testing. Now we're weeks behind and millions in the hole. Whispers filled the room. All of them were about Maria. Mr. Dalton sat at the far end of the table, silent, his fingers steepled. His eyes were locked on Maria. Finally, Dalton spoke. Maria, tell us what happened. Maria stood, her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. The cooling line reroute wasn't the problem. That fix removed the overload error completely. If the prototype shut down last night, something else caused it. Harris smirked. Oh, and what makes you so sure? Maria met his gaze. Because I was here when it worked. Perfectly, for hours. If it failed after that, then either a part failed or someone changed something. The room went still. Are you accusing someone of sabotage? Harris asked, his voice dripping with false innocence. I'm saying. Maria replied carefully that the data from last night doesn't match the conditions we had before. If we check the system logs, we'll see exactly when and how it changed. Dalton's eyebrow rose slightly. Do it. The engineers pulled up the logs. The room was dead quiet except for the clicking of keys. Then, the lead tech frowned. Here, there was a settings change at 11:47 p.m. The cooling sequence was bypassed entirely. Lorna's head snapped toward Harris. Only someone with a level 4 access code could do that. Harris chuckled, spreading his hands. Well, it wasn't me. Dalton's eyes never left him. Who was on site last night? A security? Officer entered the room holding a small tablet. We checked the camera logs. Only 2 people entered the prototype room after hours, Harris and Maria. Gasps filled the room. Maria's chest tightened. That's impossible. I went in. At 9 p.m. to grab my bag. It's me, I never touched the controls. Harris leaned back in his chair, feigning surprise. That's convenient. Dalton raised a hand to silence the noise in the room. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. I'll make this simple. I believe one of you. The other is finished here. Right now, the entire table leaned forward. No one spoke. Dalton's eyes moved from Harris to Maria, then back to Harris. Maria stays. A wave of murmurs rushed through the room. Harris's smirk cracked for the first time. Dalton continued, his voice like steel. I've watched Maria work. I've seen the results with my own eyes. If she says the fix wasn't the problem, I believe her. Which means the shutdown was deliberate. He turned to security. Pull the full footage from every angle. If it was sabotage, we'll find it. And whoever did it will be out by the end of the day. Harris didn't argue, but the look in his eyes told Maria this wasn't over. After the meeting, Dalton called Maria into his office. You know, I just put my reputation on the line for you, he said. Maria nodded. I know, and I'll prove you were right. Dalton leaned forward. Good, because now you're officially cold on this project. If we succeed, the credit is yours. If we fail, Maria finished the sentence for him. It's my fault. Exactly, Dalton said. Are you ready for that? Maria took a breath. I've been ready for years. I just didn't have the chance. As she left the office, Maria felt the shift in the air. Some people looked at her with admiration. Others glared openly. But one thing was certain, she was no longer invisible. Dalton had made his decision, and now Maria had to prove it was the right one, before the people waiting for her to fail made their next. The days after the sabotage were intense. Security reviewed hours of footage, Engineers worked overtime, and Maria barely slept. She wasn't just trying to fix the prototype now, she was fighting for her future. Every test, every adjustment, felt like it was being watched under a microscope, and she knew exactly who was waiting for her to fail. One late evening, Maria was alone in the prototype room studying the machine's new performance logs. The data was better, much better, but something still bothered her. The system was running smoothly, but she could see a tiny spike in the readings every few minutes. Most people would miss it, but Maria had learned that in machines, the smallest problem could become a disaster if ignored. She pulled a flashlight from her bag and crouched low, inspecting the inner framework. Her fingers brushed over a cable that felt slightly loose. When she traced it back, her stomach tightened. It wasn't just loose, it had been cut halfway through and taped back in a way that would fail under heavy loads someone had planned for the machine to fail again. The sound of the door behind her made her spin around. It was Harris. "You're not supposed to be here alone," he said, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. Maria held his gaze. "Neither are you." He smiled faintly, stepping closer. "You've been lucky twice, Maria. But luck runs out. And when it does, people like you go back to where they belong." Her grip tightened on the flashlight. "You mean cleaning?" "Floors. That's exactly what I mean," Harris replied. "This project is worth millions. I've worked my whole career to get here. You think I'm going to let some janitor take the credit?" Maria's voice was steady now. "This isn't about credit. It's about doing the job right. And you just proved you care more about your ego than the company." Before he could reply, the door opened again and Dalton stepped in. He had heard everything. The silence in the room was crushing. Harris tried to speak, but Dalton's expression was colder than Maria had ever seen. "You're finished here," Dalton said. His voice was quiet, but final. "Security will escort you out. And if I find out you've touched another project in this city, I'll make sure every CEO knows exactly who you are." Harris's face turned red, but he didn't argue. Two guards appeared at the doorway, and in minutes he was gone. Dalton turned to Maria. "You just saved us again." The following week was the most challenging of Maria's life. With Harris gone, the team was short-handed and deadlines were closing in. Maria worked side by side with Lorna and the others, often staying long after midnight. Slowly, something began to change. The whispers behind her back faded. The doubtful look softened. People started asking her for advice and listening when she gave it. And finally, after weeks of testing, the prototype was ready for the full demonstration. The entire top floor gathered in the main testing hall. Investors, executives, engineers, even media reporters. Dalton stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment we've been working toward. Today, we reveal a machine that will change the future of our company." He glanced at Maria, and it wouldn't have been possible without the person standing beside me. Murmurs ran through the crowd as Maria stepped forward. Some still looked surprised to see her there. Others smiled knowingly. Dalton continued, "Maria will be running the demonstration herself." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the start button. The machine roared to life, the sound deep and confident. The cooling system flowed perfectly. The belts moved in perfect sync, and the sensors stayed green from start to finish. The crowd broke into applause before the test even ended. When it was over, Dalton turned to her in front of everyone. "From this day forward, Maria is the senior lead engineer for this division." Gasps and cheers filled the hall. Later that night, Maria stood outside the building, watching the city lights. She thought about the journey from mopping these floors to standing at the head of a project worth $500 million. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her son. "Proud of you, Mom. I told everyone at school you're an engineer. Now, Maria smiled, her eyes stinging with tears. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She wasn't just someone people overlooked. She had proved to the company, to Dalton, and to herself that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places, and this was only the beginning.